Life is a battle. Are you ready to fight? Jeremy Stalnecker has led Marines into combat. He's faced life or death decisions, and now he helps veterans with their toughest war, the one in their minds. In this episode of Manlihood, he shares battlefield-tested lessons on leadership, courage, and why hesitation can be fatal, on the front lines and in life. Don't miss this one.
This is Manlihood, the podcast for men who want to rise up and live with purpose. With your host, Josh Hatcher, this show is here to help you level up as a husband, father, leader, and man, with real conversations and strategies to help you in every area of your life.
Gentlemen, welcome to Manlihood. I'm glad you guys tuned in today. I'm your host, Josh Hatcher. This is a podcast for men where we help men become even better men. This is where men are forged through discipline, leadership, purpose, and wisdom. I'm hoping that we can learn some wisdom today from our guest, Jeremy Stalnecker, who knows what it means to fight on the battlefield and in life. So he was a Marine Corps infantry officer, and he led men into combat. He was awarded the veteran Navy Commendation Medal with V for Valor in Iraq, but his mission didn't end there. Now he's the executive director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. He's helping veterans and warriors battle PTSD, find purpose, and rebuild their lives. You may have heard of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. It's been talked about on the Sean Ryan podcast, and it's really a big deal. This guy is helping a lot of people get healing. We've had some other people who've been associated with the Mighty Oaks Foundation on our show before. I'm really grateful for the chance to talk to Jeremy, and we've learned a lot from him in this episode, in this conversation. So I'm excited about talking about that. So before we get into it, though, I just want to remind you, go to the Manlihood website and click on store, because we've got some amazing Manlihood gear for you. We've got some sweatshirts, some hoodies, some t-shirts, some hats, jackets, workout gear if you want to hit the gym and you want to, have the good dry fit rash guard stuff that you can wear. We've got all that there, and you can rep what it means to be manly. My favorite are the Tougher Than Hell and the Man the Heck Up shirts. I think those are awesome. I think whenever I wear those out, people always comment on them. So go check it out. Yeah, support Manlihood, rep us, show everybody that you're a man. In this episode, guys, Jeremy Stalnecker is going to share how military principles apply to everyday life, how hesitation can be fatal, and how to stand firm in faith and discipline when life tests you. So if you're ready to step up, take responsibility, and lead with strength, this is the episode for you. Let's get started. Jeremy, welcome to Manlihood. I'm grateful to have you on the show, man. How you doing today?
Doing really good. Good to be with you.
Yeah, I actually have wanted to have you on for quite a while. I talked with a friend of yours, Noel Lilly, a couple years ago, and he made me aware of the work you're doing, and so you've kind of been on my list for a little while. So when you guys reached out, I was excited to have the chance to talk to you.
Yeah, so. That's perfect. Well, that's the good thing about doing a regular podcast. You always need guests at some point down the road, right? so worked out perfect. So good. Yeah, no, I'm glad. That's great to be with you.
Yeah, so why don't you kind of introduce yourself to our listeners, talk about your story a little bit, your background, and what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So currently I am the CEO of an organization called the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and we work with veterans, active duty service members, and first responders dealing with some degree of trauma. It's not always combat trauma. In fact, more and more, it's not combat trauma because the wars have kind of tapered off. And so we're talking with folks who have trauma related to childhood or relationship issues or whatever the case they've brought into the military with them. or that the military has made worse. And we help them navigate that, help them move beyond that trauma and find hope and purpose on the other side of that. We have 5 locations across the country. We have about 1,000 folks a year will come through one of our week-long programs. Our program's 5 days long. And since 2012, we've reached almost 7,000 people. And so keeps us busy, a lot of good things happening. And, we just know this by watching the world around us. The world is not becoming a nicer place or a better place necessarily, and people continue to struggle. And so we continue to have the opportunity to help folks. But my background leading into that, it's not something you just do, right? It's something that you kind of work toward. I started kind of my adult life in the Marine Corps. I was a Marine Corps infantry officer, served with 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, based out of Camp Pendleton here in Southern California. Did a number of things, but my final deployment was to Iraq in 2003. We were part of the initial invasion into Iraq, the initial push into Iraq, and really a life-defining time for me. Obviously, it was very historical in the sense of what was happening. We were staying in Kuwait. We had set up in Kuwait. We moved across the berm on the first night of the war, made our way to Baghdad on April 10th, 2003, the big battle of Baghdad. It was a big battle. It was called the Battle of Baghdad, or it was the Battle of Baghdad. It just happened to be big. That was our final firefight. We stayed in the country for a while and then retrograded back and came home, and I got out of the Marine Corps. And so it was a crazy transition where I went from leading Marines in combat, something that I'd always dreamed about doing from the time I was very young and really pointed my life toward leading Marines in combat. And then, of all things, when I left the Marine Corps, I went into ministry. I started working at a church. It was the church that my family and I had been a part of while I was in the Marine Corps, and kind of a lot of conversation, a lot of reasons for that transition. We had 2 young kids, and it was the right thing to do. But the timing was what it was, but it was very difficult. It was a hard transition. Again, from leading Marines in combat to now working on a church staff. I don't have a Bible degree or a Bible background or a ministerial background. And I was hired really to lead, to project manage and do a lot of those things with a very young staff and help our pastor do that. But a completely different environment, right? I went from one environment, very type A, very aggressive, to a very volunteer-based, trying to get people to do what they say they're going to do kind of environment. And for a short period, the bottom fell out. I struggled a lot during that first year out of the Marine Corps. And God worked in my life and had a lot of good people step into my life. Eventually, 5 years later, left that church, and I pastored a church up in the San Francisco Bay Area for 7 years. And it was during that time that Mighty Oaks was getting started, and I got involved with Chad Robichaux and his family, who were starting Mighty Oaks back in 2012, and we've been at it ever since. So that's the thumbnail, 30,000-foot view, but those are the highlights, I guess. Marine Corps ministry, and now doing what I do, kind of the combination of the two, the military and the ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you serve still in ministry, in church ministry as well, or just in the Mighty Oaks is your full-time thing?
So Mighty Oaks is my full-time job. This is what I do all of the time. I'm very involved with my church, and I'm on the board of my church. Preach quite a bit, which I enjoy, but without the responsibility. So it's like the best of both worlds. Yeah. I get to preach, but I'm not responsible for anything after that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of freedom there.
There's a lot of freedom there, yes.
Yeah, I could understand that. Yeah, so... but I mean, I know from my friends who are Marines, some people talk about, when you're no longer in the service, they talk about being, former Army, Marines are always Marines, right? Isn't that how that goes? You guys kind of always...
That's what they say. It can get very confusing when they say that, right? No, I'm a Marine. Yeah, but you're 73 years old. Like, maybe that's a former thing, right? But yeah, certainly the ethos, the principles that make someone a Marine, those don't leave you. And it's part of kind of that historical lineage, I guess. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is it just an attitude, a mindset that you guys hold on to, you think?
Yeah, I think so. The Marine Corps, among the branches, and every branch has its thing, but among the branches is very rooted in its history, understanding Marine Corps history, where we came from as Marines, and really tying into that ethos or that lineage, right? It's viewed as a brotherhood that goes back to 1775 when basically maritime-based soldiers became Marines to protect shipping of the colonies at the time, and so we view our history as part of that or as that, and we find our place in that. And so I think the Marine Corps is a lot more focused on where we came from, which helps to develop kind of this ethos, and I think in a lot of ways allows the military or the Marine Corps as an organization to go forward. So yeah, it's pretty unique in that sense.
So, tell me about how you got involved with Mighty Oaks. What was it that got you plugged into that? Were you walking through trauma of your own in that process?
We had. My wife and I went through a long process. I always say that I tell people it took a year for me to work through that. My wife would tell people that it took about 10 years, but it took a long time, right? And we walked through that. We had good people come into our lives and help us work through that. But one of the things that I did when I left the Marine Corps is, 2003, right? So social media and those kind of things, I'm sure they were present, like MySpace existed or something, I don't know. But it wasn't what it is today. You're not plugged into everyone all of the time. I had a flip phone, right? And so it was very easy to disconnect from the military community, which I did. Because when I started to struggle, a big part of that for me was an identity issue and trying to understand who am I now and what do I do now that adds value? It was all of those questions that people ask. And I kept looking over my shoulder. So I kept looking back going, well, I should go back to that, or I need to be a part of that again, or if I was just there. And so a big part of healing for me and growing and moving forward was really just disconnecting. I'm not going to stay connected to the military. I'm not going to stay connected to the Marine Corps or to the men that I served with. I'm proud of my service. I'm thankful for my service, but I've got to stop hanging on to that because my identity was so strongly there. In order to really understand identity, I had to move beyond that, and I did for about 10 years. And that was the period of time where my wife and I were working through these things. I was working through these things. And then I had a Marine reach out to me, again, this is 10 years later, almost 10 years later, reach out to me, and he had met Chad Robichaux. So Chad and his wife founded Mighty Oaks. Incredible story. He served in the Marine Corps, served in Afghanistan for a number of years, came home, dealt with post-traumatic stress. Huge story, right? Bottom falls out, marriage issues, all those things, but someone stepped into his life and mentored him and got him to a place where he understood what it was to have a relationship with God, what that means to him in the face of the trauma that he had dealt with, how to move forward in spite of that trauma. And with all of that, he decided, I need to share this with others, and started Mighty Oaks. That was in 2000, the end of 2011. So they started to put those pieces together, and it was about that time that a Marine that knew him, also that I had served with, introduced us, and Chad said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing." Chad's very charismatic. He's connected to everybody, but didn't have a particular background in ministry or program development and that kind of thing. And I was pastoring at the time, so he said, "Would you help me with this?" And I did. But what's interesting is the first time I went to a program, right, it was just getting our friends together and we're going to try this thing out. Very different than what we do now. But the first time we did that was the first time that I had seen the Marines, about 10 or 12 of the Marines that I had served with since leaving the Marine Corps. I just hadn't been around them. I hadn't stayed in touch with them. I didn't know anything about their lives. And as proud as I was of my service and what I had done and what we had done, I then started to hear, so this is 10 years later, started to hear about suicides and broken homes and broken, family relationships and all of the stuff that we're very familiar with now. But I was completely disconnected with it or from it. And really sitting there, and I can picture in my mind now where that conversation happened. And for me, that was the first time I realized that, I wasn't alone, first of all. I'm not the only one who's ever struggled through this or dealt with this. So that was a big piece of it. But then beyond that, my service to these men didn't end when I put my uniform back in the closet for the last time. I've learned some things. I've grown through some things. And now I have an obligation to help others who have been through the same things. And so for me, being introduced or reintroduced to those guys and introduced to the idea of Mighty Oaks really is what it was at the time, and trying to understand how we could help other people. It was novel. Coming from a ministry background, it was interesting as an opportunity maybe to minister to some people that really needed help. And I realized that I needed help, that the people I've served with needed help, and that it was us, kind of us guys, right, that were going to take care of each other. No one else is going to do this work. This was 2012. Not everyone is connected to what was happening in the VA system and in the military in 2012, but it was failing. Suicides were on the rise. Access to care was very difficult to get. The system was overwhelmed. It was inundated. And so if we didn't take care of ourselves, then no one else was going to be able to do this. And I had not realized that or understood that until then. And so from that moment forward, it really was just okay, I need to be a part of this. And what does that look like? And how do we get more people through this thing? And that's what we started to do and started to build.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That recognizing, your own journey was a part of that.
Yeah.
And seeing that. Yeah. I think a lot of times our own pain really is kind of the, we kind of have to heal first. I think that's really what leadership is, is we go first. So. Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly right. But part of it, so it is that. And then part of it is realizing I'm not just healing for me. And this is a huge realization I had to come to, because we tend to go, all right, I need to heal, I need to grow, I need to, whatever language we use around that. But we tend to think of it in terms of how is this going to help me, my situation, my family, my relationships. I'll be better at work. I have more opportunities. If I can grow past this, if I can heal past this. And as a leader, I need to be the one that steps out and does that. But man, growing and healing and addressing traumas and all that stuff, it's not really about us, and it's definitely not only about us. There are so many people behind us that need us to do that, so that we have the ability then, the firm foundation, if you will, to reach back and help them. And that took me a long time to figure out. And that's what this process kind of did for me, I think. It took me from this okay, I'm working through this on my own with people that care about me in private. I was pastoring a church, dealing with a lot of this stuff, right? So I've got my public life and my private life, and I'm just dealing with it over here because this is my thing. Well, it was realizing, no, there are a whole bunch of people that need to kind of get a view into what I've been struggling with so that I can help them because they're struggling in the same way. So yeah, it's healing. It's taking the step forward first and then looking back over your shoulder and saying, who can I help now?
So I think that while the military in general have a lot of people that struggle with PTSD, and I think because the trauma is so intense, right? I mean, you're dealing with life and death, right in front of you. You're taking lives, you're seeing lives taken, you're losing your brothers, you're losing, your body is being wounded. And then, and the same thing with, like you said, you talked about first responders. My uncle's a Indianapolis firefighter.
Yeah.
And they're seeing some rough stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm finding that there are a lot of people who are also dealing with these things, but I don't think they really even understand what they are or how it works. What exactly is PTSD? How does this work? How does that, I think when people look at it, they just think of, that's for you guys.
Yeah.
Maybe this affects more people than I think they realize.
Yeah. Well, if I could explain what PTSD was, I could write a book, it'd be a bestseller and everybody would use it. I think we've been struggling through answering that question for a very long time. If you go back historically, I just saw a report on this this morning. If you go back historically, we can go back to the Peloponnesian Wars and what was written about them and the soldiers returning home and what they were dealing with. And it had different names throughout time. It's been called soldier's heart, right? There's something broken. There's a heart issue. We don't know what it is, but soldiers have it after coming back from combat. It's been called shell shock. It's been called, traumatic response. And post-Vietnam, kind of in the 80s, it took on that title of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now it's called post-traumatic stress syndrome in a lot of places. But what is it? It is a response emotionally, often physically, and I would say spiritually, to traumas that have happened in our lives. And you're correct. Something like, I don't have the stats in front of me, but something like 70% of Americans will deal with a traumatic event at some point in their life, right? I mean, being born is traumatic. There are a lot of things that happen that are traumatic in our lives. I'm in Southern California, and as we record this today, there are massive fires taking place in Los Angeles County. I just heard that over 1,000 homes have been burned to the ground. It's out of control, right? That's extremely traumatic to lose that. So people are going to go through that, and then they're going to have to deal with what that means. It affects people in different ways. There's trauma that happens because of an event. If you were to look at it clinically, a clinically diagnosable traumatic event that leads to post-traumatic stress would have something to do with death, a near-death experience, sexual trauma, or the death of a loved one. And so it's that severe type of event that comes into a person's life. One of the definitions that I have heard of post-traumatic stress trauma, and I love it because it kind of clears the deck a little bit for me, is it is an event. So post-traumatic stress, what is it? An event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. An event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. If you have dealt with things in your life or are dealing with things in your life that prevent you from coping, from dealing with the day-to-day of life and the things that you're supposed to be able to do, then that traumatic event could be classified as post-trauma stress. The trauma happened. Now you're dealing with the stress of it on the other side of it. I heard a clinician recently define PTSD as delayed healing. So we're all going to deal with trauma. It's natural. It's normal. It impacts our emotion, the way we feel. Sometimes it impacts even our brain chemistry and how our body responds and chemicals and hormones that are released. These are normal things. These are natural things. But post-trauma stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, I don't love that word disorder, but that delays or prevents healing. So the trauma happens, you don't get over it. You don't move past it. You don't grow through it. We understand that trauma, when it happens to us, our body has a way of responding to that. It stores that information historically to prevent us from getting hurt in the future if we encounter a similar situation or a similar traumatic event. Our body is created to deal with the traumas of life. We're not disordered or broken if we're dealing with trauma. It's the problem that is disordered, not how we respond to it. But if we get stuck there, kind of in this loop, I can't get beyond that trauma, that's when we start to have problems. And that's where so many people, again, you mentioned law enforcement and the first responder community. In the military, there are kind of these acute traumatic events, these big bad things that happen, and then there's space and time, and something like that may not happen again. In the law enforcement community, in the fire service, it happens, every day. Every day they're dealing with something. And so it's dripping, time after time after time, no opportunity to deal with it, no opportunity to address it, no opportunity to grow through it, and eventually that will catch up with them. So that was a really long, sloppy answer, but it's hard to define. But post-traumatic stress is a response to trauma that comes into your life. That's the broken or disordered thing that comes into your life. You're not disordered because of that. Your body responds to that the way it's supposed to, naturally, in a way that is designed to keep you safe and allow you to process these things. But often people get stuck in that process and never really move through it, never move beyond the trauma. You don't forget trauma, and that's not what I mean by move beyond it, but never get their feet back underneath them. And that's when it becomes what is clinically defined as a disorder.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It actually brings a lot of clarity to it, because I think that, I think it becomes a buzzword where people just kind of throw it out there.
I agree.
They use it to describe, oh, I'm feeling bad today, so I'm just going to call it this, and maybe they don't really fully understand what it is. And I think that makes a lot of sense and helps me get a clearer picture of it, and maybe our listeners as well, to really fully understand. Or, well, not fully understand, like you said, because it's more complicated than fully understanding it. But
and
maybe
it
get
is
a clear picture.
It is complicated. I think that's one thing people have to understand, right, about PTSD and these issues of trauma. This is something that the medical world has been trying to understand and deal with for a long time. If anything good has come out of the wars, it's that a lot of research, a lot of attention has been put on these issues. But defining it is very, very hard, and it has to be defined symptomatically, so that makes it even harder. It's not something that anyone can look at and say, oh, because I see this on a scan, you have PTSD. It's, do you have this symptom? Do you have that symptom? Are you having a hard time sleeping? Are you hypervigilant? Do you have intrusive dreams? It's this battery of questions that's asked, and based on your answers, you can be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it is very complicated. And that's why I like definitions that don't hang on to a clinical understanding of it. Has something happened to you in your life that has made it difficult for you to function? Then let's address that thing. And call it whatever you want, but let's address that thing.
Yeah. And the thing with that too is, especially as men, we have this ability to compartmentalize, where we can stuff it for a while, and we could be okay for 10 years.
Yeah.
Maybe, could be 2 weeks or 10 years. And then all of a sudden, oh, okay, this is back.
That's
and
right.
now you got to deal with this. And so, you might not realize you've got it, and you might have something that's coming up that happened to you when you were 5, and now you've got to deal with it because it's been triggered, we hate to use, men don't like to talk about trauma and triggers, but they're real. And sometimes we got to talk about them,
Yeah, so. And I think, you talk about leadership. I think that's a very important part of being a leader is being able to self-evaluate, identify problems, and not just stuff them down, right? And it doesn't mean crying in a corner. It doesn't mean broadcasting to everyone in your world that you're struggling, but it does mean being responsible enough and adult enough to get the help that you need so that you can continue to lead. And that's something that we really need to get a hold of for sure.
So what does that look like if somebody's at that place and they're like, obviously Mighty Oaks has a program, maybe we could walk through what that might look like for somebody who calls you guys and they say, all right, I've got, here I am, I need help. Yep. What would that look like?
We are a faith-based, nonprofit, faith-based program. And so that means something very specific to us. Generally or broadly, what it means is we start from the premise that there is a creator, God, that he created us. He even created us with the safeguards or the fail-safes that go into play or start to function when we deal with trauma. And so we're not broken. We're responding the way that we were created. So there's a creator, right? There's a plan. Right? That's important to understand. And that creator, because he created us with purpose and design, also has a plan for our lives. And so in spite of what's happened to us, the traumas, the trials, the difficulties, and I always have to be careful not to downplay any of those things. The traumas that people have dealt with, we think about combat trauma and those kind of things. In our military, the United States military, people decide, young people often decide to go into the military. They make that decision. And there's a lot that comes with that. I don't think most people make a fully informed decision. They don't know everything that will come as a result of that. But that's a decision that they make to put themselves in a place where they could potentially deal with this, combat trauma, this violence, right? But I think about childhood trauma. I think about childhood sexual trauma. Something like 70% of the men and women that attend our programs were sexually assaulted as children. Many of them, that's where the trauma began, and then they brought it into the military, and then it was kind of blown up. So I don't ever want to diminish the traumas that people have been through, but we need to understand that in spite of what we have been through, what has happened to us, there is still a plan. There is still purpose. There is still something beyond this, and we can move forward in spite of what's happened to us. And so we start with that premise that there is God. He created. He has purpose and design built into us. And regardless of what's happened back here, we can move toward that if we have a relationship with him and we understand that relationship. And so it's not really about medicating away symptoms. It's not even about learning strategies for coping, although all of that happens in the context of talking about what we're going through with other people. People talk about what they've been through and how they've dealt with it. But it is understanding that our identity is not that brokenness. Our identity is not that hurt. Our identity is not that thing that happened to us. Our identity is found in a God who loves us and has a plan for us and wants to carry us forward. And so for us, and we're a faith-based program. Not everyone who shows up is a Christian. Some people are angry with God, don't like God, don't want to talk, about God, but they've tried everything else. And what we want to do is simply say there's another way. And we want to model that for you over these next 5 days, give you some principles that you can apply to your life if, what you're seeing makes sense to you, and learn how to move forward into that. When we separate from the military or when we deal with trauma, our identity is often lost, or we begin to accept what happened to us as our identity. And we need to kind of deconstruct that and reconstruct it, understanding who you are. You're still valuable. You still have purpose. There is still hope. There is still direction, and you can move forward in spite of that. So for us, that's how we address it. Now, again, there are medications, and I think medication has its place, at least in the VA system. Our service members are over-medicated, some on 20 or more medications a day to deal with the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and that just numbs them out to the point where they can't make good decisions. Part of the process that has been built into us of dealing with trauma is actually dealing with it and feeling it and working through those emotions and letting those things happen. And medication can often numb that out. So, medication may have its place, and certainly it does from time to time, but we need to ask what the end game is. How long am I going to be on this? How is this helping me get better? There are psychological therapies and other therapies that have a place. But if your foundation isn't solid, understanding who I am, who I was created to be, then the other therapies at some point will fall short because your foundation isn't what it needs to be. And we try to build that solid foundation.
Gotcha. So that's really the key of what the Mighty Oaks Foundation and what your program is doing is building that. Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think that's kind of, I personally, as a Christian, I think that's really the key. I agree with you 100%, and it makes good sense. Makes really good sense to me.
Yeah, well, and we try everything, right? And again, there are a lot of good ways to think about this and address this and deal with these things, and good people attempting to do it. But when we talk about trauma, it hits like who we are, right? These are like, I don't love the phrase, but you'll understand what I'm saying. These are soul level wounds. This isn't someone stuck me with something or shot me with something. This is a soul level wound. It impacts who I am. You think about someone who's been, physically or sexually abused as a child. Well, that impacts, that touches, that strikes at who they are. That's why identity is so wrapped up in it. When we lose someone that we care about in combat, or in one of these areas that we were talking about, the first responder community or in the military community, that touches who we are. And so we have to address that from a creation perspective, understanding who we actually are, so that we can have the right foundation to then look at some of these other tools that are available and say, is there anything else here that can help me? But my foundation has to be right, or we'll just always struggle. And that's what happens for a lot of people. Yeah, I agree. And,
Jeremy, I know not all my listeners are Christians, and so, some of them are already checking out, and that's fine. Do what you got to do, guys. Sure. But I'm going to tell you, I think the other part of that and the other piece of that is, one, you've got to know who you are. But I think the other part of that is you've also got to know who God is, because when you are faced with that question, here's the immediate thing that I think a lot of people try to answer, right? They're like, why did God do that to me?
Yeah.
And no, he didn't. If that's if you view God as the cause of that, then you are viewing God wrong.
Correct.
God didn't do those things to you.
Right.
And God, because God is good and God is love. You know, I mean, now, I mean, yes, there are, you know, he's also, you know, he's just. And so, you know, there may be some aspects of that we could discuss and get into theologically, but like that's important too. Like that identity question, you know, you have to understand God's identity too and know that he's good and that he is just and that he loves, because like there's lies that we believe.
That's right.
And you got to correct that, because if you don't, then you believe lies about God, you believe lies about yourself, you believe lies about the world, you know?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that's why even, you know, the VA and other medical institutions that should be allowing people, at least, this is a fight we have all the time. Why aren't veterans at least allowed to consider faith-based options? Well, because of the lies that are believed, right? And sometimes it's lies about what faith-based means. But more to your point, and this, again, this is a conversation we have a lot because people show up so angry at God sometimes. Will God allow this to happen or cause this to happen? And if he didn't cause it to happen, he allowed it to happen. And you go through this, you know, blaming God and why God and all of those things. We try to address that. And the way that we deal with a lot of those questions is through personal testimony. Everyone who is a part of our program in leadership came through first as a student. Then, you know, through a process that we have, we identified them as someone we would like to be a part of what we do. And so we take them through a year-long leadership training process. And when they stand in front of a class and teach, which is a part of what happens during that week, they have to start with their testimony, telling their story. And often it's that story. It's, I lost someone, or this happened to me, or this happened to a family member, or this happened in combat, and I was so angry at God, I hated God, rejected the idea of God, but this is the process that I went through to understand that God is just, as you mentioned, but he also loves me and has a plan for my life, and this is the process that I went through to get there. And that's been so helpful, just the power of testimony.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when people can actually, when you have an experience and you meet him, you know what I mean? Like he's not just some, you know, distant force up in the universe. He's actually a person that cares and loves. And I think when you can actually have that, when you can actually approach it and have that experience, I think it makes a big difference. But that's the problem, is that trauma makes it easy to separate, you know, which, I mean, I think comes down to the enemy comes to lie, steal, and kill and destroy, you know? So I think that's kind of the goal.
That's exactly right.
So, but anyway, we could talk theology all night, probably.
That's my favorite topic. So yes, we could probably all night.
But yeah, back to, you know, what you're doing. So let's talk about, you know, how do we get out of that place where we're stuck? You know, we get to that place, man, where we feel like we can't heal. Yeah. We have to recognize that identity, whose we are, right? You know, where we fit into all this, you know, who we are and whose we are. But how do we get out of that place? We're stuck. Like I don't like that. That's kind of mental, right? Like I got to change my mind, but I don't even know how to do that if I'm listening to what you're saying. Like, where do we even go from here?
Yeah. So one of the challenges in every area of life, and this is why people don't accomplish more in their lives, maybe not the only reason, but one of the big reasons, is we know what we need to do. You know, in this case, I need to address this trauma, experience healing, re-engage with my relationships, you know, whatever, however we define the end game of what we're dealing with. But from where we sit, getting there is so big, and we become so overwhelmed that we just say, you know what, forget it. I mean, this isn't everything, right? I try to teach this to my kids. Don't worry so much about the project at school that's not done. Worry about doing today what you need to do so that you can get that project done, right? Like we need to take the steps, take the first step and the one after that and the one after that. We'll get there one step at a time. And if we take the right steps, we'll get there. So for me, the end game for someone who, you know, attends our program is understanding identity rooted in a relationship with God and all that involves, understanding how that relates to the trauma that they've dealt with right? And then putting those principles in place. But that's huge. So if I asked someone who is, sitting in the proverbial hole, in the darkness and the despondency and the hurt and all of that, if I ask them to get up and find their identity in Christ and start moving forward again, they're not going to be able to do it. It's overwhelming. So what does it come down to? Number one, if you need to get out of the place that you're in, you need to realize you're in a bad place, in a bad spot, right? That's principle number one. You need to be at least self-aware enough to look at your environment, look at your circumstances, your situation, and acknowledge honestly to yourself, where I am is not okay. Often the people that I talk to who are dealing with trauma, it's not the traumatic event or events that are hurting them. It's the bad decisions they made on the other side of that trauma. So there's pain that comes with trauma, so I'll medicate away that pain. Or, something comes into my life because of the trauma, so I'm going to make some really bad decisions that are very temporary to deal with how I'm feeling, how I'm thinking, or what's going on in my life. Often it's, alcohol, it's drugs, it's illicit sex, it's pornography, it's whatever, right? And so you need to be able to look at your life and go, all right, where I am is not okay. I'm thinking about harming myself. I've isolated from people that I care about and I know care about me. I'm not making any kind of progress in my life. And the things I am engaged in are not helpful at the least, and they're very harmful at the most. So that's step number one. Realize you're in a bad spot. So if you can look at your life and understand this is not where I need to be, that's step number one. Step number two for people, it can be different for every person, but I think a healthy next step or a good next step is admitting to someone that cares about you that you're in a bad place. When people come into our lives that care about us and we're struggling and they say, hey, how are you doing? We say, fine. Can I help you? No, I'm fine. When you're hurt, when you're depressed, when you're dealing with trauma, when you're struggling through these things, when you've made bad decisions that are embarrassing, the last thing you want to do is acknowledge that to someone that cares about you. And so you push away family, you push away friends, you push away those who care about you. Once you've acknowledged in yourself, I've got a problem, the next best thing you can do is reach out to someone who has your best interest in mind, not your drinking friends or your drug friends or your, people who don't want you to get well, but someone who actually cares about you, and acknowledge to them or admit to them, I have a problem and I need help. And beyond that, there are probably many steps that people can take. And again, for those who are veterans, service members, first responders, I think reaching out to us is a great step. And there's no cost to it. We cover the cost of the program. We cover the cost of travel. All you have to do is go on our website and fill out an application. We'll get in touch with you. But there are other great organizations and great opportunities. For some, it may be going to a doctor and you've admitted there's a problem and this impacts your health and your mental health, and you've talked to a friend, and it's going to a doctor and asking, what are the next steps for me? How do I connect to the right people who can help me through this? I would always point people toward spiritual healing. If you're not connected to a church family, I think you probably know someone in your life who's been asking you to go to church for, years. Get with those people and let them pull you into that church family, get some counsel, get the right people around you who can help you move forward. But the biggest, most important step is acknowledging, first of all, that you have a problem, and then being willing to admit that to someone else. Typically, the snowball starts to roll after you've admitted to someone that you care about that I have a problem and I need help. And then, we're going to work together to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that first step is the hardest for sure.
That's the hardest. Yep.
It is. And then, the other end of it is then not avoiding that person once you've told them. Right.
Well, and it, there has to be a good faith there, right? Like, I'm telling you this because I need help and I'm expecting you to help me and I'm going to engage with this. Yeah, you're right.
Then a week later when they call you up, how you doing, man? Then you can't ignore their call.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I've even had those conversations where, like, in a moment of, honest self-reflection, I tell somebody what I'm going through, and then I just don't make eye contact with them again for 10 years, right? Like,
yeah, I've done that. I do that. Yeah. My buddy Justin Willoughby, he lost 600 pounds. He's amazing.
Holy cow!
Yeah, he's amazing. I've had him on the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah, I knew him when he was massive, and I walked
Wow.
the whole journey with him, and I've struggled with my weight, and he's helped me lose weight. I mean, I probably lost that much weight too, just gained it, lost it, gained it, lost it. He's lost it and kept it off.
Yeah.
And he's always trying to encourage me, and so like I'll struggle. I'm like, dude, I need you to help me, and he'll be like, okay, and then when then I'll be doing badly, and he'll call me up, and I'll just I'll not write him back.
Yeah. You just ignore him. Yeah. Well, and that's real, right? I mean, it's okay. I've acknowledged I have a problem and I'm getting the right people in my life. But you have to be committed at some point to finding healing, whatever that means. It's coming to that place where, I forget how the phrase goes exactly, but it's something like the pain of, staying the same is worse than the pain of change or something. It's something like that, but you've just got to get to that place in your life where you just go, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
And I need help, and I know someone who can help me, and I'm going to, trust them. That's right. Yeah. That's important.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely, I think the key with all of this is, if you're going to stay in that hole, that's where you're going to stay.
That's where you're going to stay. That's right. That's exactly right.
And unfortunately, you don't stay there, because if you're going to stay there, it's going to keep sliding.
That's right.
And, the end result isn't good, and you don't want that. So, it doesn't go forward. It doesn't stay static, so
well, isolation destroys us. We start to believe, going back to those lies that we believe, we start to believe every thought that comes into our minds because there's no one there to check us on it. And we're isolated from anything healthy or helpful. If anything, we're watching videos and following people who are just going to confirm the bias that we already have about the world and ourselves and everything else. There's, we like to say you have to hit rock bottom, and you do. There's got to be, a bottom that you hit. But some people make really bad life and eternity altering decisions before they hit that rock bottom because they're all alone. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And, bringing it back to the guys and the veterans, I know a lot of guys who are vets, and so I thought we could talk to them specifically. A lot of my listeners are in that spot. I think you guys have a different, and first responders too. I think you guys have a different world, and you see things that a lot of people haven't had to see. And I know that the pressure and the trauma that you guys have endured is different than, some, pasty-tailed guy like me, right? And so, and the stats prove it. Yeah. The stats prove it. Men in general, the stats aren't in our favor, right?
That's right.
Men in general, the stats aren't in our favor because we don't handle things right. We don't handle things well. But especially vets and first responders, you guys, the stats aren't in your favor.
Yeah.
And they're saying that the stats are telling me that some of you guys need some help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask for it.
Right.
I guess that's kind of my appeal, right? If you're listening and you're sitting at home and you're listening or you're watching this and you're like, okay, today's the day, let's get some help.
Yeah, you don't have to stay where you are, and you're not alone. You're not the only person who's ever been through this, and that's kind of where I was. You go back 20 years or whatever, 15 years. That's where I was. I went through this stuff. I dealt with it largely. I say alone. I had my family and people who were around me, but I kept it really quiet because I didn't want anyone to know what I was struggling with, because I didn't think anyone else struggled like this. Here's the news flash, right? Like, everybody struggles to some degree. Everybody, military or not, whatever, everybody struggles to some degree. But those who have served, particularly in combat, but in the military and definitely in the first responder world, they struggle and struggle in a lot of the same ways that you're struggling. So don't believe that lie that you're alone. You're not alone. And there is hope. So don't believe the other lie that there is no hope. There is no path forward. There absolutely is not just one, but many paths forward if you'll just acknowledge that you have a problem, that you need help, that you can't do it on your own, and reach out.
Yeah, for sure. for sure. Jeremy, I want to ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
I like to ask all my guests these questions, and I'd love to hear
Yeah.
your perspective on this. First question is, what does it take to be a man?
What does it take to be a man? Again, that's another topic we could spend all day talking about. I think very succinctly, what is it? What does it mean to be a man? I think that a man is someone who has learned to take responsibility. Robert Lewis, he's an author who's written a lot on men's issues and talks a lot about this specifically. He makes the phrase or makes the statement that real manhood is when we learn to reject passivity and lead courageously, and then accept responsibility. Reject passivity, accept responsibility, lead courageously. Man, that was a good lead in, and then I got the quote wrong. But it is rejecting the life of passivity, right? That's where most people in our world are living right now. It's like passive, just get by, just do the thing, numb it out, play games, whatever. Not really engage in a meaningful way. That's the passive life. So reject that, accept responsibility. I can't be responsible for everything, but I can be responsible for what's in front of me, whether that's my work or my family or my actions, and then stand up and lead courageously. I think the difference between boys and men, it's not what's happened to you or an age or something else. It's that boys avoid accepting responsibility, and men understand that the only life for them is to accept responsibility. I think about kids, young men who lose a dad, and we say they became the man of the house, right? But you hear these stories of 14, 15, 16-year-old teenage boys who step up, work to provide for the family, help care for the kids, do the thing. They've accepted responsibility. That's a man. You hear about 60-year-old guys who goof around, play whatever. They're into their hobbies all the time. They don't have a good relationship with their families. They've never learned to accept responsibility. They may be old, but they're still a boy. So what does it mean to be a man? It means that you've learned to accept responsibility.
Yeah. Awesome. I think it's a great answer. So let's say, Jeremy, that you get access to a DeLorean time machine with a flux capacitor. You get it up to 88 miles an hour, and you can go back in time and visit 10-year-old Jeremy.
Yeah.
What are you going to tell him?
I don't know what I was doing when I was 10 years old. I probably didn't have the capacity to understand a whole lot, but I'm 48 years old. I have 4 kids of my own and 2 adult kids, 2 teenage kids. And these are thoughts that I have a lot. We have our first grandchild coming in a couple of months. And so, I'm always thinking about these things, right? And what do I want my kids to know and understand? I think one of the biggest lessons, I don't know if I can say one thing, but one of the biggest lessons is just be honest with yourself and be honest with other people. We're all putting on a show for somebody. We're trying to be the coolest or be closest to the coolest. We're trying to hide our failings and insecurities and all those things. We spend so much time and energy trying to protect the image that we are building for ourselves. And that really is a major barrier to healing and health and growth and maturity. One of the lessons I think I wish I had learned much younger was to just put the mask, take it off, put it down, be who you are, good, bad, or otherwise. Get help if you need help. Don't be afraid to admit that. Just be honest and sincere and transparent. That would have kept me out of a lot of trouble over the years if I had learned that earlier on.
Yeah, I would agree, man. Good stuff. Dude, so your first grandkid's coming. Dude, being a grandpa is so much better.
I've heard this.
Yeah, I've got three grandkids now. My third, my kids are all grown, and my last daughter got married this summer.
Yeah.
So yeah, 3 grandkids, and the third one was just born last month. And
crazy.
yeah, they are the best. They are the best. So much better. Yeah, you're gonna love it.
Looking forward to it. And thankfully, my son and his wife are close. They live nearby, so we'll be able to spend some time with the baby. So looking forward to it.
That's the best. Yeah, you're gonna be like, oh, why didn't we do this first?
We should have started here. Oh man.
Yeah. You'll be like, oh man, this is what it's all about. It's like the reward for putting up with all the other nonsense.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
So yes, and my last question for you is, what is your best advice for the men that are listening today?
I think we've kind of answered this as we walk through it, but I think my best advice would be surround yourself with the right people. There is that saying, and it is borne out in my life. I've seen it over and over and over again in other people's lives. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. Surround yourself with the right people, not people who tell you what you want to hear, but people who tell you what you need to hear, people who care about you, people who care about your success, people who don't have an agenda related to your success or failure, but people who genuinely care about you. Surround yourself with the right people. And then, going back to what I just said about, what I wish I had learned earlier is just be transparent, be honest. And if you're honest and transparent, you're going to find the right people, and they'll want to be around you, and they'll help you, and you'll grow together. Men, it's said, I forget who said it, most men live in quiet desperation, right? Man, I think that's true. I think most men are insecure. They're afraid to admit how they feel, and so they're very, very alone. Surround yourself with the right people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know I got a group of guys that I meet with every other Monday, and we talk about the Bible, we talk about life, we get a group chat. We talk every day. So
that's good.
These guys keep me in line, and I keep them in line, and
that's good, man.
And you need that,
Absolutely.
So, you got to have those people in your life, man. Jeremy, if the guys want to connect with you for resources, for information, what's the best way for that to happen?
Yeah, to connect with me, I'm on all the socials, and it's just my name, Jeremy Stalnecker, on whatever social thing you're connected to. To find out more about Mighty Oaks, though, the best place is to go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org, and there you can find out how to apply for a program. You can learn more about our programs, learn how to support, whatever, including contact information to get a hold of us. So that's the best place.
Awesome. Well, like I said, you're doing good work, and definitely want to support what you're doing in any way we can. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about what you're doing. Anything else you want to let our guys know before we close off today, man?
No, man, I appreciate you. Thanks for the great conversation and for having conversations like this. They're so important. And, you mentioned a few minutes ago, we're talking about faith and talking about God, and not everyone who listens to your podcast, I'm sure any podcast, necessarily believes or agrees with that or whatever. There's a saying we like to use, and it's so simple, but it's so true. If what you're doing isn't working, why not try something new? And I would just say, look, if you heard something that you just kind of pushed back on and stopped listening, man, maybe it's worth considering a different perspective, taking a look at something new. And there's a lot to be had out there if you'll just, again, acknowledge maybe I don't have it all figured out and get the help that you need. So, Josh, just thanks for having the conversation and being willing to push this out there.
Hey, I appreciate you. I appreciate your service to our country, and I appreciate your service with Mighty Oaks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeremy, I really appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing. It's noble, and it matters, and I want you to keep it up. Guys, if you want to learn more about what Jeremy's doing, if you want to check out his work, make sure you check the show notes. We've got those links there for you. Let's support him because he's doing something that matters. It's big. Again, man, thank you for what you're doing. Guys, don't forget to check out Manlihood Plus. It's a subscription service where we're offering you bonus content that you can only find there. It's exclusive content. You're not going to get it anywhere else. You can access it on YouTube and on Spotify. Small subscription fee. I give you all my best stuff for free, and I'm holding back a little bit of great stuff that's also going to help you level up as a man. And you want it in your life. I promise. Go check it out. All right, guys. As always, I love you. I care about you, and I'm proud of you. I'll see you next time.